Hello everyone, myself Nagashri. Today we are learning about the Spring JDBC or how we can work with the Spring JDBC. So the agenda for today is Introduction to Spring JDBC, Advantages of Spring JDBC, some information about the data source, centralized classes of Spring JDBC, and how we can implement JDBC core classes and interfaces. So one by one, let's learn now, start learning now, okay? First, if we consider web applications or the enterprise applications, and if we are using the Spring framework, we definitely need the interaction with the databases for storing the application specific information. Why we need that? That is because, see, if we want to search something in the DB, then we need the database. Or if we want to store some information about some web page, we need DB. We need connection with the DB. And job portals, if we consider, we definitely need the database for storing the information about various candidates. And employers, if we see, we definitely need the DB or the connection with the DB. So in order to, why we need is to access all the search services or whatever the service that they provide in advertising the jobs on the internet. So Spring API is basically used to establish the connection and interaction with the database. Advantages of Spring JDBC. Spring JDBC template allows the resources to clean up and release the database connections which are not used automatically. Also, it converts the standard JDBC SQL exceptions into runtime exceptions, which helps in better understanding of the error messages. Data source. What exactly is data source? Spring obtains a connection to the database through a data source. What exactly is a data source means? It is a part of the JDBC specification and is a generalized connection factory. It allows a container or a framework to hide the connection pooling and transaction management issues from the application code. All these things are specific to the DB pool. We supply the data source to the JDBC template. What exactly is JDBC template and all its features and functionalities we see in the next future slides. JDBC template is basically a centralized class of Spring JDBC. So it can configure itself to get the database access. It also helps in testing and running unmodified JDBC code outside the Java EE container. So in the XML file, how it is configured, we can see below. Bean ID is equal to data source. Data source is basically from the org.springframework.jdbc.datasource.driver-manager data source, that is a class. So property name is driver class name, value is com.mysql.jdbc driver, and this is the path of the DB localhost :3306 for MySQL, username, password, and the value. This is how it is configured. Basically the class name is very important, as well as the credentials of the MySQL or whichever the DB that we are preferring. So implementing the JDBC core classes and interfaces. Spring Framework provides 4 packages for implementing the JDBC. These are very important packages. org.springframework.jdbc.core, org.springframework.jdbc.datasource, org.springframework.jdbc.object, org.springframework.jdbc.support. These are 4 important. Now let's see what the core package contains. org.springframework.jdbc.core.simple, it contains the simple JDBC template class and the related simple JDBC insert and simple JDBC call classes. We will go ahead and see what is JDBC template, which is very important class, which we have a separate category and explanations for itself. And org.springframework.jdbc.core.named param, it contains the named parameter JDBC template class and the related support classes. So now let's have a look at what exactly is JDBC template class. It is the central class in the JDBC core package. It handles the creation of the resources and release of the resources. Also, it avoids the common errors and executes the core JDBC workflow by leaving the application code to provide SQL queries and extract the results. This class executes SQL queries, update statements or stored procedure calls that initiate over result sets. It also catches all the JDBC exceptions and translate them into the generic and more informative exception hierarchy, so that we are very clear about what exactly is the exception, which are defined in the DAO package. While using the JDBC template class, we need to implement the callback interfaces. What are those callback interfaces? Those are prepared statement creator, callable statement creator and row callback handler. So what exactly is prepared statement creator? It is an interface which creates a prepared statement by providing SQL and other necessary parameters, which uses the connection given to create the prepared statement. Similar to the prepared statement creator, we also have the callable statement creator. This is nothing but it creates the callable statement by using the given connection. The row callback handler, it is again an interface that extracts values of each row of a particular result set. So now let's discuss the query, update and other operations related to the JDBC template class. As was already told, JDBC template class is the central class and the most important class of the JDBC core package. It handles all the releasing of the resources, creation of the resources, avoids all the unnecessary errors and executes the core JDBC workflow. So the more we learn about JDBC template, the more it is very good for us to program the SpringJDBC, because it is very important class. It is used for querying as well. So how we are using the select command to query the database table? So let's see here. For example, handling the employee details here. Let's see the code snippet. Private JDBC template is the object. Here in the package we definitely need to include the interface. Now select query, select star from employee. Employee is a table where we are selecting all the details of the employee from the table employee. List employee, we are listing all the collection of the employees. JDBC template object dot query, select query, new employee mapper. Here what we are doing is the select query is to select the employees, reading all the details of the employees. JDBC template object is the object to read the employee object. Next, employee mapper. It is a row mapper object to map each record fetched Now let's continue learning about querying using the JDBC template class. Here we use the select command to query the database table using the JDBC template class. Depending upon the application requirement or the client requirement, the database table can be queried. For example, we use this class while creating an application to handle the employee details. What we need to do? We need to retrieve the number of employees whose data is available in the employee table. So we are doing the select star from employee. If the data is available, all the data will be retrieved. So what is happening here? The query that we are using is private JDBC template. JDBC template is the object of this JDBC template class. Listing here select query will retrieve the number of the data of the employees, and here we are retrieving the list of employees here. Select query is used to read the employees. JDBC template object is the object to read the employee object from the database. Employee mapper method is a row mapper object to map each fetched record to the employee object. Also, we can also perform the updations or some operations on this employee, like saving the employee, updating the employee data, and deleting the employee record. So what we are using? The normal select query itself, insert query we are using here. Insert into employee values like ID, name, salary, and update employee table, set the name, salary and ID, and delete from the employee table where the particular ID name is equal to the ID name, that is .get ID. Here we are using the get ID, and along with that for every statement we are returning the updated value of the query update. Then let's learn about the methods of the JDBC template class. Method and the description is as follows. First is public int update string query. This is used to insert, update or the deletion of the records. That is, whatever the operation done, that will be updated. Next, the same query with object arguments. This is used while using the prepared statement for the given number of arguments. Then we also have the public void execute. Execute is a data definition language query. So here public void execute string query. Next is public of the type T execute prepared statement callback action along with the SQL. Next is result set extractor is an argument. Lastly, it is the row mapper. Now let's understand the named parameter JDBC class. So what is this? It's a template class with a set of JDBC operations which allow the use of named parameters instead of question mark placeholder. As we all know, question mark, asterisk, all these dot and all are the wildcard characters which match a particular value. Here it uses the named parameters instead of question mark here. So once the value of the named parameters are substituted to the JDBC style question mark placeholders during the execution, the instance of this particular named parameter JDBC template class is delegated to the wrapped JDBC template object. So let's see this code snippet here. What is happening here is the named parameter JDBC template with this object. This is a class. Here setting the data source, we are setting the data source. This parameter we are creating a new named parameter object. So the method that we are doing is public T execute method we are using, which is having the parameters SQL, map and prepared statement callback object. So how we are using the named parameter JDBC template class here? We are using the execute method here with the parameters SQL, map and prepared statement callback. So this particular name parameter JDBC template dot execute method we are using, wherein we are having the query, map and prepared statement callback. Next is the one more thing we need to do here. We need to learn here. What is that is here the named parameter variables. That particular variable is declared which holds the value of all the employee table results. That is one thing that we need to consider here. Next is the simple JDBC template class. This class we can call it as a wrapper. What it wraps? It wraps around the JDBC template class, which takes the advantages of Java features like where arcs and auto boxing. So what it does here, first again we are setting the data source for that particular object, simple database template object, but the syntax here is update query comma mapper comma id. So how we are using it? Update, the query will have the update query here, and that particular query result along with the name and the employee ID, it will be updated and returned with a simple JDBC template object. That is how it is used. We are returning the simple JDBC template with the name, ID and the return of the employee update query. So we also use the query for object in this case. Next is driver manager data source class. This class is used to perform the establishment of connection with the database. So in order to perform the database operations, first thing what we need is to establish connection with the database. So this class is mainly used for that, to establish a connection with the database. While using the SpringJDBC layer, we can either obtain a data source from the JNDI or configure our own implementation provided by the Spring framework. So how we can provide using the Spring configuration is during the unit testing. So let's see how we can use the driver manager data source class here. Here the driver manager data source class, first what we need to do here is we need to have that class here, that is org.springframework.jdbc.datasource.driver manager data source, and the driver class name, URL, username and password. So what is the URL connectivity? JDBC HSQL DB :HSQL. Here that Hibernate SQL that we are using here. So the instance here, the DS is called the bean instance of this particular driver manager data source class is created, and the relevant methods are the set driver class name. We can see here the set driver class name, set URL, set password or whatever. All these things are invoked to establish the connection with the DB. So as soon as we see itself, we will understand that if we are having the username, password, URL and driver class name, it means we are establishing the connection with the DB. Next comes the SQL exception translator interface. This interface is implemented by the classes that can translate between SQL exception and the data access exception. Hierarchy. There are definitely differences between the two. So here we are implementing the classes that translate between the two exceptions. What is data access exception here? It is Spring's own data access exception hierarchy. Okay, now since while we are learning the SQL exception translator interface, we need to know the SQL error code SQL exception translator class. What does this class do? See, it is a class here, SQL error code SQL exception translator. This class is the implementation of SQL exception translator interface. This class, what it does is, it will have some vendor specific codes and the error code translations based on the code held in the SQL error codes. This class is created and populated by the instance of SQL error codes factory class. That factory class will have all the SQL error codes and the objects based on it. So, whatever the content that is present in the SQL error code XML configuration file, this SQL error code factory will have all those details. So how we are implementing, we can see with this below code snippet. So this is the main interface, SQL error code SQL exception translator, where custom SQL error codes is just a custom part which extends from the main class. So here what we are doing, what it is having is, it is returning a get error code minus 12345. Say 12345, we can call it as the error code, and many other errors it can return simply left, which can be translated by the default SQL translator implementations. So we can also see how the custom translator can be used here. Similar to other codes, we are using this operator and setting the data source first. Then we are using setting the setting the exception translator here and updating all our records. That is, update skill set employee salary is employee star 500. That is, employee salary will be updated. So if there are any error codes, it will be returned. So the custom translator MySQL, we are having the custom SQL error code translator. What it is doing, it is passing a data source, because we still need to know how the default translation of the error codes will come up with the help of the SQL error codes.xml file. Always it will be looked into before returning any value. Next is how we are controlling the database connections. The first, there are very many ways to establish the database connections using Springs. So let's discuss here how we are using the classes and interfaces of the spring.org.springframework.jdbc.datasource package to obtain the connection with the database. One way is by using the data source utils class. This class is a convenient and powerful way, or a helper class, which provides static methods to obtain connection from the JNDI and close the connections also if necessary. It also supports the Spring managed transactional connections. That is, if we see the transactional connections here, mainly the Spring we are using for the transaction sessions and other features. So here data source utils class is used for all those purposes. Also, whatever is supported by the data source transaction manager connection, that will be supported by this util class. This class will also has support for the thread bound connections. Internally, it is also used by the JDBC template class, which is the most powerful class of Spring application. Next is smart data source interface. This interface should be implemented by the classes that can provide a connection to the relational databases. Like, this interface extends the data source interface so that the class implementing the smart data source interface can query whether the connection should be closed after a given operation or not. Next is abstract data source. If we consider the abstract data source, it's a base class for Spring's data source implementation. what it does, it implements the code that is for certain methods it provides as an implementation, like for example some login timeout method or setting the login timeout, getting the login timeout. Such methods it is used as a base class. Also, if the developer wants to write his own data source implementation in order to establish connection with the database, he can use this abstract data source. Next is the single connection data source. This class is an implementation of smart data source interface which we saw here. So it wraps a single connection that is not closed after each use. Obviously, it is not multi-threading capable. If we invoke the close method to close the connection, assuming it to be pooled connection, then a close suppressing proxy is returned instead of the physical connection. Next is the driver manager data source. It is an implementation of the standard data source interface, and it configures a plain old JDBC driver through the bean properties, and it returns a new connection every time. That is one thing that we need to know. It returns a new connection every time. Also, it is useful for the standalone environments that is outside the Java EE container. For the standalone applications and the environments, it is very much useful. Also, along with the data source being within the Spring IOC container, also it is very useful, as well as in conjunction with a simple JNDI environment also it is very much useful. So, we have the close method simply we can use to close the connection so that any data source aware of the persistence code will work. Next is the transaction aware data source proxy. This proxy for a target data source, it adds awareness to the Spring managed transactions. What it does, it is somewhat similar to the traditional JNDI data source that is provided by the Java Enterprise Server. Next is the Java Source Transaction Manager. This class implementation for single JDBC data sources we are using here, this one. It binds a database connection, JDBC connection from the specified data source to the currently executing thread. It allows for one thread connection per data source, and this class also supports custom isolation levels for the appropriate JDBC statement queries. Last but not the least, we are having the native JDBC extractor. This interface is used for extracting the JDBC objects from the wrapped objects of the connection pools. So, depending upon the execution environment where we are executing our code, we can use any of the implementations of this native JDBC extractor. These are the different implementations. That is simple native JDBC extractor, C3PO native JDBC extractor, commons DBCP native JDBC extractor. See, first is, this is a simple implementation, and it assumes a pool that wraps connection but does not database. Metadata will not be used here. This C3PO native JDBC extractor, it is basically used for the C3PO connection pooling. In such requirements it will be used. Commons DBCP native JDBC extractor. This is used in some Jakarta projects where there are higher versions of some Jakarta projects DB connectivity. This will be used. JBoss native JDBC extractor. This is basically used in JBoss application server of higher versions. Next, Java WebLogic native JDBC extractor. This is used in WebLogic server after 8 version, whichever the higher version is there, after that it will be used. Next, WebSphere. This is used for WebSphere application server, as the name itself suggests. And XAPool native JDBC extractor is basically used for object webs XAPool. That is, in some applications which are shipped for JOTM clients. Next, let's understand how the simple JDBC classes work. That is, implementing these simple JDBC classes and its implementations. So first is how we use the simple JDBC insert class. The instance of this simple JDBC class is a multi-threaded and a reusable object. It helps in easy insert capabilities of data into the table. So it also provides metadata processing to simplify the code that is needed for basic insert statement. If we consider the JDBC insert here, simple JDBC insert data source with table name student. So what we are using here, this hash map we are using, where we are putting the name and the age, name and the value here. Lastly, we are executing. So here what is happening is we are inserting the data into the table. Put parameter is used to put that particular name and age value into the map object parameter. So the JDBC employee DAO, we are using the JDBC employee DAO for this purpose. What it does, first we are declaring the JDBC employee DAO, that is, we can give any name to it. It's a data access object which implements basically the employee DAO or whatever. See, here we are having the student, so we can have a student DAO which implements the student class. So there inside what happens, first we are as usual setting the data source with the help of this parameter and inserting the data into the student table. Then we are adding student one by one using this particular code. That is, what we are doing, we are using map string comma object, some value here we can give. Using the hash map, we are putting one by one all the names and ages of the students one by one. We can also have some additional methods inside, but this is the basic methodology of how we are using the simple JDBC insert. JDBC insert, simple JDBC insert is an object to insert record in student table. JDBC template object is used to read the student object in the database. We also can have some additional methods like adding the data into the student table, deletion and other features as per our requirement. Now let's discuss about the SQL parameter source interface. Apart from using map, we can use this SQL parameter source interface and implemented for specifying the parameter values. As we saw here, we are using the map. Instead of that, we can use this SQL parameter source interface to insert rows in a table. Also, this is said to be the most efficient approach. Most efficient, and it's a very plain approach when compared to the map approach. So there are two approaches or implementations for this purpose. So first is working with the bean property SQL parameter source class. Second is working with the map SQL parameter source class. So let's see, working with the bean, this is the bean property SQL parameter source class. So here what is, we can see here very clearly, bean property SQL parameter source class. What is happening here? This class is used if the values to be inserted in a table are provided by the instance of a Java Bean class. If it is a Java Bean class, the instance of a Java Bean class, we can easily use this bean property SQL parameter source class. Now let's understand the bean property SQL parameter source which we had started. This particular class is used if the values to be inserted into a table are provided by the instance of a Java Bean class. So what is happening here? The instance of this Bean property SQL parameter source class is created by passing the instance of the employee Java Bean. See here we can see employee EMP Java Bean class as an argument. Next is the map SQL parameter source class. This class, how it is used? It is used by passing in a simple map of parameter values with the methods of the named parameter JDBC template. See, if we consider here named map SQL parameter source, named parameter SQL class, the methods of that will be included with this. So this somewhat resembles a map, that is add. We are also having add in the map, as well as the same thing we can see here, it is having the add value here. This method is used here. So it is used for specifying the parameter values. Add value method is used here. There we were using the add method. So it is more or less the similar thing, but it is plain as well as it is more efficient. It is said to be more efficient. So here map SQL parameter source class is created and the add value method is invoked. This add value method, what it does, we need to know that. That is the only thing that we need to know here. This method accepts the column name and its value as the parameters. See, we are having the name, employee ID, employee, number of employees, everything we are having here. After understanding how to insert the data, now let's get into the how to call that particular stored procedures. So how to call the stored procedures with the help of simple JDBC call class. Let's know on that. So using the simple JDBC call class, basically the instance of this particular simple JDBC call class is this is also multi-threaded and reusable object which represents a call to the stored procedure or a stored function. It also provides the metadata processing to simplify the code required to access the basic stored procedures or functions. First, we need to know that while executing a call, what we need to do, we have to provide the name of that particular stored procedure. That is what we need to know, or stored procedure or stored function or a map, which contains the parameters. We need to know the name of that particular stored procedure. The name of the supplied parameters also we need to know. If it is matching with the in and out parameters, the number of parameters in and out, that is inside into the DB or out display. So that must be specified during the declaration of the stored procedure itself. Let's see how it is done. First, let's consider the below code snippet where we are having simple JDBC call, an object JDBC call, new simple JDBC call source with procedure name get record. So here what we are doing here, we are using the map SQL parameter source dot add value in ID, that is in executed. So JDBC call here is a simple JDBC call object to represent a stored procedure. In is to pass a parameter to the stored procedure. Student is an object here, student class, student object. Out is to result display. Out is nothing but to get the result back. Map the object out from the retrieved data to the outside parameter. In is to insert the data. So now let's see how to use a stored function in this case. See, here we are having dot with function name. Previously we had with procedure name here, stored procedure name. Here this is with function name. Apart from that, all other parameters are similar to using the stored procedure. In parameter, again it is an object to pass the parameter. So now let's discuss in detail the calling of the stored procedure and calling of the stored function by using the simple JDBC call class. So first let's see here how we are using the calling of the stored procedure. Here we are having the simple JDBC call object, which represents here with stored procedure name. Here the stored procedure name is very important here. So in the stored function we are having with function name. That is the only difference. Apart from that, all other things remain the same. So here we are also using the add value method, which inserts the details of the student record. So here simple JDBC call class takes advantage of the metadata present in the database. So how it does, it looks up the names of the in and out parameter. Those are very important here. In and out parameters play a very important role. In means how the object passes a parameter into the stored procedure. Out is how the object represents the output of the stored procedure result, call result. So we declare a stored procedure with a name, some read employee or something we can give, which contains an in parameter and out parameter. So in parameter is here is in ID and two out parameter, that is out name, out age. These are the two out parameters here. So the first name and the last name, we can also specify the first name and last name. So this code snippet, what is happening here, JDBC call is a simple JDBC call object which represents a stored procedure with this procedural name. In is passing a parameter into the stored procedure. Out is displaying the stored procedure call result. That is, these are very important parts here. Also, how we can use the stored procedure function. Before that, we need to know one more point here. That is, matching the names of the out parameter is very important here. That is, if we are using, in case the first name and the last name, if we are using, the matching of the out parameters is very important to retrieve the instance of that particular student. There is something called the case sensitivity. So we need to have case insensitivity lookup we can have here, or we have to be very careful in mentioning the parameter names. That is very important. Otherwise, it will give rise to exceptions. Also, there is something called result map case insensitive value that we can set it as true or false also. That is a particular method which is present in the JDBC template. That part also is there which we can do. That is, JDBC template will have something called set results map case sensitivity, map case insensitive. Whether it is true or false we can set based on our requirement. Next, using the stored function. So how we are using the stored function? So here the process of calling a stored function is similar to that of calling a stored procedure. Here the basic difference is that we need to specify the function name here instead of the stored procedure name. So we are using here the method with function name, that is stored function name method. The invocation of this method simply implies that your call is to a function and therefore the corresponding call for string or a function call is generated. So here execute function we can use here. It is a method that will return a particular value of a function or the object of that particular type. So again here also we are having the in and out parameter which does the same job, that is passing a parameter into the stored function or displaying the parameter from the output, that is displaying the output. Next, let's go on to understand the performing the batch operations in JDBC Spring. Now let's go on understanding about the performing of JDBC batch operations in Spring. So first let's understand what exactly is a batch. A single executable unit for performing multiple operations is known as batch. So, if we batch multiple calls into the same prepared statement, then most of the JDBC drivers provide improved performance. So, there is improvement in the performance and efficiency when we implement this JDBC batch operations. However, so one more thing that we need to understand here is, if we group the updates into batches, then we can limit the number of round trips to the database. Or in other words, what we can say is, the batching up of multiple calls to the same prepared statement helps in improving the performance and also avoids the round trips. So here the agenda is learning the batch processing using these classes, that is JDBC template and simple JDBC template. So what exactly is the using of the JDBC template class? In order to perform the batch operation in a Spring application by using the JDBC template class, we need to implement the batch prepared statement setter interface. So what is this interface? First we need to know that. That is what we can see here, batch prepared statement setter. What it does, this is basically an interface that is passed as a second parameter to the batch update. Here batch update is a method, SQL query batch prepared statement setter. This interface has two methods, that is get batch size and setting the values. So what is get batch size? That method returns the size of the current batch, and setting the values is to set the values of the parameters that are present of the particular prepared statement. So these two are two methods that we need to use. So here first what we are doing here is, this batch prepared statement setter is a batch executor which sets the value to the prepared statement per item identified by list of objects, student and index. So here the student and the index I. So here get batch size returns the size of that particular batch. And as usual we are also throwing the SQL exception here if there is any exception in case. And this is a JDBC template object. SQL is the query, update query to update the student age, and update counts is an array that provides row count per update query. Next is the simple JDBC template. This particular class provides an alternate way of implementing the batch update. Instead of implementing a new interface, we can simply provide parameter values in a call. This framework, the Spring framework, what it does is, it loops over these values, whatever we provide in a call, and it uses as an internal prepared statement setter. Also, this API varies depending upon the named parameters that are used or not, and based on any requirement of the application. So, while using the named parameter, we need to use the SQL parameter source, which we saw in the previous slides. That is, for each member of the batch, we are having the SQL parameter source. So, we are having this implementation. How it is used, we can see here. That is simple JDBC class. Within that, we are having the data source, and we are having the batch update here. What it does, it will create a batch. We are using the update query and the row mapper here. So, since we have been using the row mapper, we need to understand what exactly is the row mapper here. Some Spring JDBC objects. Very important Spring JDBC objects. That is row mapper, result set extractor, and prepared statement setter. We will be using this in almost all the codes. So we need to have a clear understanding of about these JDBC Spring objects. See, we have been hearing about the row mapper, result set, extractor, prepared statement setter, etc. These three are some of the basic JDBC Spring objects which we have to be using in our codes, which are very important. So now let's understand at least the basics of these three implementation and how they are basically implemented in our codes. First is the row mapper. Row mapper is present in the interface, that is org.springframework.jdbc.core.rowmapper of type interface. It is used by the JDBC template for mapping rows of a result set on a per row basis. So implementation of this interface performs the actual work of mapping each row to a particular result object. There are definitely the chances of SQL exceptions if anything arises when we call the JDBC template, and it will be returned, it will be thrown. Next, so how it exactly the declaration is done? First step is creating a JDBC template object using a configured data source, as we already saw in some code snippets. Next is creating a student mapper object implementing row mapper interface. Third is using the JDBC template object methods to make the database operations while using the student mapper object. So we can see here, first is string SQL is equal to select star from student, list of all the students. So a new student mapper within the JDBC template object, it will be wrapped, and that will be initialized to this students. So SQL here is reading the query to read all student records. JDBC template object here is to read student records from the database. Student mapper object, what it does, to map the student records to the student object. So here student DAO is an interface which student JDBC template implements. So here what we are having, the JDBC template object dot query SQL query with the new student mapper. So basically we need to import the package row mapper here. See, this student mapper implements this row mapper of the student, and it maps each row with the row number and the result set, and it will set the name, age and ID here. That will be returned. Next, the result set extractor. This is a callback interface used by the JDBC template query methods. What it does, the task of extracting the results from the result set. But there is no need to worry about the exceptional handling, that will be taken care. So how this is done? First, we are creating a method, the list students. So SQL query is select star from student and everything is listed. First, what we need to know is, here the JDBC template object query will be the new result set extractor, that is taking all the results from the student DB. And SQL exception is thrown if in case, and it will be taken care also. Here basically this SQL is nothing but it will read the query. It is a query to read all the student details, and JDBC template object is used to read the student object from the database, and the result set extractor, it parses the result set object. Next is the prepared statement setter. This is basically an interface. It acts as a general callback interface used by the JDBC template class. This interface sets the value on the prepared statement provided by the JDBC template class, and the number of updates in a particular batch is using the same SQL, it does it. So how it is done? Inside the JDBC template object query, we are having the prepared statement setter. So that value will be returned to the SQL to read the query to read the students. Prepared statement setter object is used to set the parameters in the query.